Young billionaire buys twin homeless girls sold by their stepmother and is shocked to discover they are his daughters, presumed dead at birth. Grant Whitmore hated noise. The constant clamor of the big city pursued him like a waking nightmare. Impatient horns, loud cell phone conversations, music leaking from other people's headphones. At 30, he had already built his life around silence. His apartment was on the top floor of an old building, with double windows and thick curtains that blocked both sound and light. His job as a contract proofreader for a law firm allowed him to work from home most of the time. On that rainy Wednesday in October, however, Grant had to go out. An important client demanded his physical presence to sign some documents. Now, with a leather briefcase under his arm, he cut through downtown, eager to return to his sanctuary of quiet. "It's faster this way," he muttered to himself, turning into a narrow alley he knew well. This shortcut would save him 10 minutes on the main avenue, 10 minutes of noisy chaos he preferred to avoid at all costs. The alley looked different, normally empty except for a few boxes and trash cans. It now held a scene that made Grant slow his steps instinctively. In the middle of the way, a woman in a faded red coat was gesturing at a man in a suit. Next to her, two small figures stood as still as statues. Grant almost turned back, but something about those two small silhouettes stopped him. They were children, two girls, so alike that they could only be sisters, maybe twins. They wore clothes that were far too large, dirty and torn. Their dark hair was tangled, and even from a distance, Grant noticed the emptiness in their eyes that had seen more than any child ever should. "500 for both, sir. It's a fair price." The woman's voice was harsh, like sandpaper. "You won't find a better deal anywhere." The man in the suit shook his head and hurried away, passing Grant without meeting his gaze. The woman cursed and pulled the girls closer. Grant stood frozen. The scene before him was so surreal, so horrible, that his brain took a moment to process. A woman selling children in broad daylight. It couldn't be real. The light rain trickled down his face, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the girls, on their hunched shoulders, on their vacant expressions. Without realizing it, Grant started to move toward them. The woman noticed him and immediately forced a smile, revealing yellowed teeth. "Hello, sir. Interested in my girls? 500 for both. They're good girls, quiet. They don't cause any trouble." Grant felt a wave of nausea and anger rise in his throat. "You should be ashamed," he said, his voice louder than he intended. "Ashamed of selling children like merchandise." The woman, who must have been in her early 40s but looked much older, narrowed her eyes. "If you're not interested, move on. I don't need a lecture." Grant looked again at the girls. They were trembling, though he couldn't tell if it was from cold or fear. The smaller one, the one without a birthmark near her eye, was partially hiding behind her sister. Both stared fixedly at the ground, as if they had learned that meeting an adult's gaze could bring trouble. In that moment, something inside Grant, something that had lain dormant for years, woke up. Without hesitation, he pulled out his wallet and took out several bills. "Here are the 500D, he said, extending the money. "They're coming with me now." The woman grabbed the money quickly, counting it with nimble fingers. Satisfied, she stepped back. "They're yours now. No refunds." Grant crouched down to the girl's level. "Come with me," he said, softening his voice. "You deserve better than staying with her." The children looked at him with distrust, then at the woman as if asking for permission. "Go," the woman said curtly. "He paid for you." Grant resisted the impulse to say anything else to the woman. Instead, he extended his hands to the girls. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." They didn't take his hands back, but when he began to walk, they followed him like little ghosts. The woman had already disappeared at the other end of the alley, counting the money. "What are your names?" Grant asked, once they were a safe distance away. The girl with the birthmark looked up briefly. "I'm Nora," she said in a voice so soft he had to lean in to hear. "This is my sister, Hazel." "I'm taking you to my home," Grant explained. "It's dry and warm there, and there's food." At the mention of food, he noticed a spark in their eyes. He took off his coat and placed it over their shoulders, covering them both like an improvised umbrella. The entire way back to his apartment, Grant wondered what on earth he was doing. He had spent his whole life building a fortress of solitude and silence after losing everything he loved, and now he was bringing 2 children home. It was madness. He knew nothing about kids. He knew nothing about being responsible for another human being. But looking at those small, frightened faces, something in him, something he had buried along with his hopes years ago, resurfaced. A protective instinct he hadn't realized still existed. When they arrived at his building, the doorman gave a curious look at the 2 small and wet figures following Grant, but asked no questions. In the elevator, the girls pressed themselves against the opposite wall, as if wanting to keep as much distance from him as possible. "I live on the top floor," Grant said, trying to break the ice. "It's a quiet place. You'll like it." No response, just 2 pairs of dark eyes watching his every move warily. When he finally opened the door to his apartment, he felt a strange embarrassment. The place was immaculately clean and organized, just the way he liked it, but it was obvious it wasn't a home for children. There were no bright colors, no toys, no sign of any life beyond his own. The walls were white, the furniture dark and minimalistic. The only personal touch was a bookshelf, carefully arranged by subject and size. "Come in," he said, holding the door. "Let's get dry and eat something." The girls entered slowly, looking around as if expecting a trap. Their bare, dirty feet left marks on the wooden floor. But for the first time in years, Grant didn't care about the mess. "The bathroom's over there," he pointed. "I'll get towels and—" He paused, realizing they would need dry clothes. "Wait here." In his bedroom, Grant frantically searched for anything that might fit. He found 2 clean t-shirts that would look like dresses on them. He also grabbed 2 unopened packs of socks, purchased and never used. It was the best he could offer at that moment. When he returned to the living room, he found the girls exactly where he'd left them, standing there soaked, making little puddles on the wooden floor. They seemed afraid to move without permission. "Here," he said, handing them the towels and clothes. "You can dry off and change in the bathroom. Then we'll eat." They took the items but didn't move. "Together," Hazel said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was even softer than her sister's, almost a whisper. "Can we go together?" "Of course," Grant answered, realizing they were afraid to be separated. "Of course you can. The bathroom is right there. Be careful. The water might be too hot. Let me know if you need help." While the girls were in the bathroom, Grant went to the kitchen and opened the fridge, staring at its limited contents. What do children eat? He had eggs, bread, some cheese, milk. He decided to make grilled cheese sandwiches, simple but comforting, and to warm some milk. He heard the bathroom door open and light footsteps in the living room. "Come here," he called from the kitchen. "The food is almost ready." The girls appeared in the doorway, transformed. Without the grime and in dry clothes, they looked different. Grant's t-shirts came down to their knees, and the socks, folded multiple times, were still too big for their small feet. They had combed their damp hair, long and dark, though it was still tangled in some places. "Sit down," Grant said, gesturing toward the table. "Please." They complied, climbing onto the chairs with some difficulty. Grant noticed how small and thin they were. Nora, the one who spoke first, seemed to be the older twin by a few minutes, taking on a subtle leadership role that many older twins carry. Grant placed the warm sandwiches on plates, along with cups of warm milk, and sat on the opposite side of the table. "Go ahead and eat." He didn't have to repeat himself. The girls devoured the food as though they hadn't seen a decent meal in days or weeks. They ate so fast they nearly choked, as if afraid someone might take the sandwiches away at any moment. "There's more," Grant said gently. "You can eat slowly. No one will take your food away." They ignored him, finishing in record time. When they were done, they looked at him expectantly, like pets waiting for more. "Do you want more?" 2 vigorous nods. Grant made more sandwiches, and once again the girls devoured everything. After the 3rd sandwich each, they finally seemed satisfied. Nora even leaned back in her chair, her eyes half closed in contentment. "Thank you," she murmured, surprising Grant. "You're welcome," he replied, feeling strangely moved by that simple word of gratitude. Night was falling, and Grant realized he needed to figure out where the girls would sleep. His apartment had 2 bedrooms, but the second one served as an office and was full of papers and books. "You can sleep in my bed," he offered. "I'll take the sofa." Hazel looked at her sister, who shook her head. "Can we stay here?" Nora asked, pointing to the plush rug in the living room. "Together?" Grant frowned. "On the rug? But it's not comfortable. The bed is big enough for both of you." "We're used to the floor," Hazel said, lowering her eyes. "In our stepmother's house, we slept in the basement. And Cheryl never let us use the bed," Nora added. "She said it was only for important people." Those simple statements squeezed Grant's heart in a way he hadn't felt in years. A mixture of anger and compassion filled his chest, a feeling so intense it caught him off guard. "I understand," he finally said, swallowing the lump in his throat, "but it's different here. You deserve a bed. You deserve comfort." The girls didn't respond, but their wary looks said it all. They didn't believe him, not yet. "That's all right," Grant agreed. "You can stay on the rug tonight if you want. I'll get some blankets." He improvised a bed on the rug with duvets and extra cushions. The girls lay down together, curled against each other like puppies seeking warmth. Grant covered them carefully and moved away, sitting on the sofa. "Good night," he said. "If you need anything, just call." "I'll be right here." "Good night," Nora replied, while Hazel just watched him with large, dark eyes. Within minutes, the girls were asleep. Exhaustion, stress, and finally the sense of safety had overcome them. Grant stayed there, watching them, their steady breathing, their small bodies finally relaxed. They looked even smaller in sleep, defenseless and vulnerable. What had he just done? He had literally bought 2 children in an alley. It was illegal, immoral, and completely out of character for his methodical, cautious nature. He should call the police, the authorities, social services, someone who knew what to do with 2 orphans. But seeing those kids sleep so peacefully, maybe for the first time in a long time, something stopped him from picking up the phone. He remembered his own loss, how his life had been shattered years ago. He remembered the pain, the loneliness, the void he had tried to fill with silence and order. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself. "Tomorrow I'll decide what to do." Grant fell asleep right there on the sofa, never taking his eyes off the girls. His last thought before drifting off was that, for the first time in years, his apartment didn't feel so silent or so empty. He woke to the sound of soft footsteps. Opening his eyes, he saw Nora and Hazel standing before him, still wearing his oversized t-shirts, watching him with cautious curiosity. "Good morning," he said, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "Good morning," they replied in unison, their voices still small but slightly more confident than the day before. "Did you sleep well?" They glanced at each other and then nodded. "Are you hungry?" Another nod. In the kitchen, Grant prepared what he had: scrambled eggs, toast, and some orange juice he found in the back of the fridge. Once again, the girls ate as if every meal might be their last, although this time a bit slower, allowing themselves to savor the food. "This is good," Hazel said, pointing to the eggs. "I've never had them like this." "They're just scrambled eggs," Grant said, surprised. "Dad used to make eggs sometimes," Nora explained, "but after he died, our stepmother just gave us scraps." After breakfast, still sitting at the table, Grant finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Where did you come from? What happened to you?" The girls exchanged glances, the silent communication only very close siblings can have. "We lived with our dad," Nora began at last. "He was good to us. He worked a lot, but he always brought food." "He told us stories," Hazel added, a rare smile lighting her face for a moment. "Stories about princesses and dragons. But he got sick," Nora continued, the smile disappearing. "Really sick. He couldn't work anymore. Then he died." "I'm sorry," said Grant sincerely. "What about your mum?" "We never met her," Hazel said. "Dad said she left when we were babies." "After Dad died," Nora took over again, playing the role of spokesperson, "we stayed with our stepmother. She didn't like us. Never did." "She said we were a burden," Hazel added, looking at her empty plate. "That we cost money and were good for nothing. She used to hit us when Dad wasn't looking," Nora said, her voice trembling slightly. "After he died, it got worse, much worse. She locked us in the basement, Hazel said, for whole days sometimes, with no food. Then she sold us to Cheryl, Nora concluded. Said it was to pay what we owed her. Grant felt a lump in his throat. Cheryl is that woman in the alley? Nora nodded. She said she'd give us a new family, but... Her voice trailed off. But she just treated us badly, Hazel completed. Said we'd have to pay her back for what we cost her. Grant closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the anger he felt. When he opened them, he saw that the girls were watching him apprehensively, as if worried he too could turn mean at any moment. You're safe now, he said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. Nobody is going to hurt you here. I promise. The girls said nothing, but something in their eyes changed subtly. It wasn't trust yet, it was too soon for that, but maybe it was hope, a small fragile hope that Grant silently vowed not to destroy. I'll take care of you, he heard himself say, the words coming out before he could think them through, and for the first time in a long time since he had lost everything he loved, he felt the warmth of another presence by his side. He was no longer alone in that apartment that had once been too silent. Grant looked out the window. The day was clear. The previous night's rain had given way to a shy autumn sun. There was much to do: buy clothes, see a doctor, handle legal matters. But for now what mattered was that those two children were safe. And in some strange way he couldn't fully understand yet, they had brought something back into his life, something he thought he'd lost forever. Grant woke early the next morning. He hadn't slept well, thinking about what he needed to do next. Buying clothes for the girls was urgent, but something even more important worried him: their health. During their bath, he had noticed how their ribs were visible under pale skin. The dark circles under their eyes and their constant fatigue weren't normal for children their age. After a quick internet search, he found a pediatric clinic that accepted walk-in patients. He got dressed and went to the living room, where Nora and Hazel were still asleep, curled up under blankets. Girls, he called softly, crouching beside them. We have to go out today. Nora opened her eyes immediately, as if always on alert, even in sleep. Hazel took a few seconds longer, blinking groggily. Where are we going? Nora asked, her voice still laced with distrust. To see a doctor, Grant replied. A children's doctor. Panic filled their eyes instantly. Hazel clung to her sister's hand. We're not sick, Nora said quickly. We're fine. Grant realized his mistake. For children who likely associated strangers with bad experiences, the idea of a doctor could be terrifying. It's not because you're sick, he explained patiently. It's just a checkup to make sure everything's okay. All kids do that. The doctor is gentle, I promise. The girls didn't look convinced, but they stopped protesting. While they ate breakfast, more eggs and toast, which seemed to have become their favorite, Grant tried to make the idea less scary. After the doctor, we can buy you some new clothes and maybe a few toys. How does that sound? That got their attention. Hazel even managed a small smile. Toys like the ones in stores? She asked. Exactly like the ones in stores, Grant confirmed. After breakfast, he used his credit card to call a cab. He still didn't want to expose them to public transportation and headed to the clinic. In the car, the girls sat pressed together, watching out the window with barely disguised fascination. Grant realized they probably didn't ride in cars often. The pediatric clinic was a low, colorful building with pictures of animals on the walls. At reception, a middle-aged woman smiled at them as they entered. Good morning. How can I help you? Grant hesitated. How could he explain the situation without raising suspicions? No documents, no medical history, no verified relationship with the girls. He took a deep breath. Good morning. I need these girls to be examined by a pediatrician. It's complicated. They're temporarily under my care, and I need a health assessment. The receptionist looked at the girls in their makeshift dresses, Grant's oversized t-shirts, and still tangled hair, her gaze softening. I see. I'll need some basic information, but we can handle that. Dr. Miller is on duty today, and he's great with kids. What are their names? Nora and Hazel, Grant answered. Nora and Hazel. His mind worked quickly. Giving his last name was premature, but he needed something. Sullivan, Nora and Hazel Sullivan. While the receptionist filled out the forms, Grant knelt to speak quietly with the girls. Don't be scared. The doctor just wants to see if you're growing well. Like a checkup, you know. Nora nodded seriously, while Hazel half hid behind her sister. 20 minutes later, they were called into the exam room. Dr. Miller was a man in his 50s with graying hair and round glasses. His kind smile seemed genuine. "Hello, Nora and Hazel," he greeted, lowering himself to their eye level. "I'm Dr. Miller. I'm very happy to meet you." The girls didn't answer, but they didn't recoil when he invited them to sit on the colorful chairs in the corner of the room. Grant stood, watching closely. "Do you know what a pediatrician does?" the doctor asked, holding up his stethoscope. When they shook their heads, he continued, "I'm a special kind of doctor who only takes care of kids. I help you grow strong and healthy. May I listen to your hearts? It's like a game." To Grant's surprise, the girls let the doctor examine them without protest. Dr. Miller was patient and gentle, explaining each step before touching them, asking permission with a respect that clearly surprised them. After measuring, weighing, and thoroughly examining both, he made some notes on his tablet. Then he turned to Grant. "Mr. Whitmore, may I speak with you for a minute? Girls, you can wait over there. We have some games and books on that table." The girls looked at Grant, who nodded encouragingly. Reluctantly, they went to the indicated table, but kept their eyes on him. Dr. Miller lowered his voice. "Mr. Whitmore, these children show clear signs of chronic malnutrition. Their skin is dry, their weight is well below what's expected for their age, and there are obvious vitamin deficiencies. Blood work will confirm, but I can see it in their eyes, nails, and overall pallor." Grant's heart tightened. "Is it serious?" "It's reversible," the doctor replied, "but it will take time. They're not in immediate danger, but they need consistent care. I also noticed some old bruises, especially on their backs and arms. Some look like they might have been caused by—" He hesitated. "By adult hands." Grant swallowed hard. "They came from a difficult situation. I'm trying to give them a better home." The doctor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that. And they seem to trust you, which is good. Kids who've been through trauma develop a sixth sense about trustworthy people." "What do I do?" Grant asked, feeling completely lost. Dr. Miller smiled kindly. "3 main things. First, a reinforced, balanced diet. I'll give you a list of nutrient-rich foods they need. Proteins, vitamins, or essential minerals. Second, establish a routine. Children who experienced instability desperately need predictability. Set times for waking up, eating, sleeping. This brings them security." Grant nodded, mentally taking notes. "And third, perhaps most importantly, emotional stability. They need to know you won't vanish, that you won't reject them, that you won't hurt them, that the home you provide is permanent." "It is permanent," Grant said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. The doctor smiled. "In that case, we're off to a good start. I'll prescribe some vitamin supplements to speed their recovery and schedule a return in a month." While Dr. Miller wrote out the prescriptions, Grant looked at the girls. They pretended to look at a picture book, but their eyes flicked to him constantly, as if afraid he might disappear any second. "One last thing," the doctor said, handing over the papers. "You mentioned they're temporarily under your care. Is there any legal process underway?" Grant hesitated. "Not yet. I found them yesterday." The doctor raised his eyebrows, but kept a neutral expression. "I understand. Well, I suggest you regularize this situation as soon as possible, for their sake and yours. I know an excellent social worker who can help with that." Without asking too many questions, Grant took the doctor's card gratefully. "Thank you, Dr. Miller, really. That's what we're here for," he replied with a smile. Then he turned to the girls. "Nora, Hazel, we're done for today. We're done for. You were very brave patients." Leaving the clinic with prescriptions in his pocket and a list of nutritional recommendations on his phone, Grant felt strangely energized. He had a purpose now, something missing in his life for years. "Who wants to buy new clothes?" he asked the girls, who still seemed a bit stunned by the medical experience. Their eyes lit up. The rest of the day was a roller coaster of firsts. For Grant, his first time buying children's clothing, trying to guess sizes and preferences. For the girls, the first time choosing their own clothes, trying on shoes that weren't hand-me-downs or leftovers. "Can I really pick anyone?" Hazel asked, looking in wonder at a row of colorful dresses. "Anyone you like," Grant confirmed. They chose reverently. Nora preferred darker shades and practical items. Hazel was drawn to bright colors and sparkly details. Grant let them pick whatever they wanted, adding essentials himself: underwear, pajamas, coats. In the toy section, the same awe struck them. They walked slowly down the aisles, touching everything with hesitant fingers, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Can we really take one?" Nora asked, holding a doll with the same care one might have for a relic. "You can take a few," Grant replied. "Choose whatever you like." Nora chose the doll and a small doctor kit, perhaps inspired by the recent visit. Hazel grabbed a big teddy bear she could hug and a simple board game. Grant added books, building blocks, and more games they could play together. At the pharmacy, he bought the recommended supplements and took the opportunity to get children's hygiene products. At the grocery store, he filled the cart with items from Dr. Miller's list: fresh fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, whole grains. By the time they finally got home, they were all exhausted. "Let's put everything away and then rest a bit," Grant suggested, opening the door to his apartment. The girls stepped in carrying their lighter bags, refusing to let go of their new treasures. Grant followed with the rest of the purchases. Inside, he helped them organize their clothes in the drawers of the room he had hastily prepared for them, his old office, now cleared of piles of papers and boxes. "This is your room now," he said, watching Nora and Hazel gaze in amazement at the two small beds that had been delivered while they were out. An emergency online purchase he'd made the night before. "Tomorrow we can decorate it more if you like." "It's ours," Hazel asked incredulously. "Just ours." "All yours," Grant confirmed. "Always." In the kitchen, Grant put away groceries and prepared a nutritious lunch following the doctor's guidelines: grilled chicken, brown rice, and steamed vegetables. To his surprise, the girls ate it all, even the veggies children often reject. "Is it good?" he asked, watching how methodically they chewed. "Very good," Nora answered. "Better than any food we've had before." After lunch, while the girls explored their new toys in the living room, Grant sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. Following the doctor's advice about routine, he started drafting a schedule. 7 a.m., wake up, bath, brush teeth. 8 a.m., breakfast. 9 a.m., educational activities. 12 p.m., lunch. He stopped, realizing he didn't know what kind of routine would suit them best. They'd need school soon, but first he needed to gauge their educational level. And he needed to handle legal matters: guardianship, documents, registrations. "Grant!" Hazel's small voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the kitchen doorway, holding something in her hands. "Yes, Hazel." "I found this in my new things." She showed him a small pink hair bow that came as a bonus with one of the dolls. Can I put it on you?" Grant blinked in confusion. "On me?" Hazel nodded shyly. "So you don't look so sad anymore. Your hair falls in your face when you think a lot." Grant felt something warm expand in his chest. Wordlessly, he crouched to her height. "Sure you can." With clumsy but determined fingers, Hazel pinned a small lock of Grant's hair with the pink bow. When she finished, she stepped back to admire her work and smiled, the first open, genuine smile he'd seen on her face. "Now you look nice," she declared. Nora appeared behind her sister, holding her new teddy bear. Seeing Grant with the bow, she let out a surprised giggle. "You look like a dad now," she said with a sincerity that pierced Grant's heart like an arrow. A dad. The word echoed inside him, stirring memories of what might have been, of what he had lost before ever having it. But now, looking at these two girls, who had somehow found their way into his lonely life, Grant felt he might be getting a second chance. "Who wants banana pancakes for dinner?" he asked, standing up with the pink bow still in his hair. "I do," they both shouted in unison, another first, the first time he'd heard them raise their voices in excitement instead of fear. In the kitchen, Grant set out bananas, eggs, and flour on the counter. "We'll do it together. You can help mix." As he showed the girls how to prepare the batter, he watched their faces light up. Their cheeks, still thin, now showed a faint rosy hue that hadn't been there the day before. Their eyes shone with something other than fear. That night, after a dinner of banana pancakes and honey, soon to become the first of many rituals, Grant improvised a table in the living room and opened one of the board games they'd bought. The rules were simple, perfect for beginners. "Whoever rolls the higher number goes first," he explained, showing them how to throw the dice. Hazel rolled a 5 and celebrated as if she'd won a prize. Nora concentrated intently on each turn, her tongue poking out at the corner of her mouth when she thought hard. Grant let them win a few rounds, but soon realized he didn't need to. They learned quickly. Between giggles and small celebrations, Grant watched the transformation of his apartment. What had once been a silent, sterile space now buzzed with life. The girls' voices, their light footsteps in the hallway, the colorful toys scattered on the floor. Everything created something his apartment had never been before, a home. Later, when he finally tucked the girls in for the night, in real beds this time, not on the living room rug, Grant lingered, watching them for a moment. Hazel was already sound asleep, hugging her new teddy bear. Nora resisted sleep a bit more, her watchful eyes following him. "Are we going to stay here forever?" she asked, her small voice in the darkness of the room. Grant sat on the edge of her bed. "If you want to, yes, this is your home now." "I want to," Nora said, her eyes finally closing. "It's nice here." "It's nice having you here," Grant replied, pulling the blanket up over her. When he left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar as they'd requested, Grant touched the small pink bow still in his hair. He decided to leave it there, at least for now. The next day, he would start implementing everything the doctor had recommended: routine, nutrition, stability. The girls deserved that and much more, and he was determined to give them what they'd been denied. And he realized with surprise what he himself had been missing for all those lonely years: a family. Sunday dawned with a persistent rain tapping on the apartment windows. Grant was seated in the kitchen, watching Nora and Hazel play with the puzzles they'd bought the day before. 2 weeks had passed since he'd brought them home, and the changes were visible. Their cheeks were fuller, their eyes brighter, and their initial wariness was gradually giving way to a cautious kind of joy. Banana pancakes had become a morning ritual, as had board games at night. Grant was surprised by how easily he'd adopted these new habits, as if a dormant part of himself had finally awakened. While sipping his coffee, he thought about the hallway closet. There was a reason he always kept it closed, why he never opened that door, even for storage. Inside was a single box he hadn't touched in years. Maybe it was the rain, which always made him melancholy. Or maybe it was the way Hazel had smiled when she woke up, a smile that, for a fleeting moment, reminded him of someone else. Whatever it was, that morning Grant felt ready to open the door he'd kept locked, not only in his apartment, but in his heart. "I'll be in the hallway if you need me," he told the girls, who nodded absently, focused on fitting puzzle pieces. The hallway was dim, lit only by the light coming from the living room. Grant paused in front of the closet door, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath and turned the knob. The closet was small and almost empty, except for a single cardboard box in the corner. It was dusty, showing how long it had been since he last touched it. Carefully, Grant lifted it and carried it to his bedroom, closing the door behind him. He sat on the bed, the box on his lap. His hands trembled slightly as he removed the lid. The smell of old things, paper, stored fabric, memories, hit him in a wave. On top of the pile lay a large envelope. Grant opened it and pulled out photographs, spreading them across the bedspread. Monroe smiled in all of them, eyes shining, one hand always on her round belly. In one photo, she wore a floral dress and stood under a tree in the park. In another, they were together, Grant's arm around her, both gazing at the bump that held their daughters. "Monroe," he whispered, running his fingers over the image of his wife's face. She had entered his life like a hurricane, full of life, plans, and dreams. Within a year, they were married. In less than 2, she was pregnant. Twins, they discovered at the first ultrasound, Monroe had cried tears of joy. Grant picked up the black and white ultrasound images. They were dated 3, 4, 6 months. In the last ones, you could clearly see 2 tiny profiles, 2 little heads, 4 tiny hands. "Our daughters," he murmured, feeling his throat tighten. Under the ultrasounds, he found the small notebook in which Monroe had recorded everything about the pregnancy. Her words were always optimistic, even on days of nausea and discomfort. There were name lists, plans for the baby's room, dreams for the future. And at the bottom of the box lay the most painful items to look at: 2 tiny hospital ID bracelets, never used. Grant held them, feeling their negligible weight, yet feeling crushed by it. Memories of that day, that terrible day, rushed back with full force. Monroe going into premature labor, the fear in her eyes as they wheeled her into the emergency room. Grant, expelled from the room by doctors when things went wrong. Hours of agonizing waiting in the cold hospital corridor. Then his mother, Diana, her face pale, her voice contained, telling him that Monroe hadn't survived the hemorrhage and that the babies, too fragile, hadn't made it either. All in a matter of hours, his entire family gone before he could say goodbye. Grant hadn't even seen the bodies. Diana had arranged everything: the funeral, the paperwork, the death certificates. At the time, Grant was grateful, unable to function through the paralyzing grief. Later, when the fog of mourning began to lift, he realized he had no tangible memories to hold on to, except for the items in this box. A tear fell onto the photo in his hand. Grant hadn't realized he was crying. He wiped his face, breathing shakily. 5 years had passed, but the pain felt raw, as if it had happened yesterday. On the other side of the door, he heard laughter. Nora and Hazel had probably finished their puzzle. That sound, so out of place in his apartment until 2 weeks ago, anchored him to the present. Grant began to put everything back in the box, carefully. The photos, the ultrasounds, the notebook, last of all the tiny hospital bracelets, which he slipped back into their envelope. He replaced the lid on the box and held it to his chest for a moment. "I miss you," he whispered, as if Monroe could hear him, "every single day." He wiped his face once more and took a deep breath. Then he returned the box to the closet, shutting the door firmly. When he turned around, he saw Hazel standing at the end of the hallway, watching him curiously. "We finished the puzzle," she said, smiling timidly. "Do you want to see?" Grant forced a smile, though he was sure his eyes were still red. "Of course I do." As he followed the little girl back to the living room, where Nora proudly displayed the completed puzzle, Grant felt a strange confluence of past and present, the pain for what he'd lost, and the gratitude for what he had unexpectedly found. "Look, Grant," Nora exclaimed, pointing to the bright castle picture. "We did it all by ourselves." "It's beautiful," he said, genuinely impressed. "You're very smart." He sat on the floor with them, letting the girl's presence chase away the shadows the box of memories had brought forth. It still hurt to think of the daughters he never knew, of the wife he lost so early, but somehow Nora and Hazel were filling voids he hadn't realized remained. As he helped dismantle the puzzle to start again, Grant had no idea that the pieces of another, far more complex puzzle were beginning to align around him, a puzzle that, once complete, would change everything he believed about his loss. Grant stared at his computer screen, researching for the umpteenth time how to obtain legal guardianship. 3 weeks had passed since he'd brought Nora and Hazel home, and although the pediatrician had been understanding, Grant knew he couldn't continue in this undefined situation much longer. The girls slept in the next room, now decorated with 2 small star-shaped nightlights that projected constellations on the ceiling, a specific request from Hazel, enchanted by an astronomy book. But as cozy as the room felt, and as established as their routine seemed, Grant was well aware of the precarious ground beneath his feet. Legally, he was nothing to them. And they officially didn't exist. Dr. Miller had mentioned this during their last visit, 3 days ago. "They're responding very well to treatment," he'd said, observing the weight gain and improved color in the girl's cheeks. "But Grant, we need to address the legal situation. Without documents, they can't be enrolled in school, get insurance, or receive other essential services." Grant had agreed, knowing he couldn't postpone the inevitable any longer. That was when the doctor handed him a business card. Richard Palmer, the best family attorney I know, discreet and efficient. Tell him I referred you. Now, late at night in his dimly lit kitchen, Grant looked at the card. He took a deep breath, realizing he couldn't wait any longer. He would call the lawyer in the morning. When dawn broke, the girls came running into the kitchen as usual, lured by the smell of banana pancakes. Over breakfast, Grant explained they had an appointment later that day. "We're going to see someone who'll help us with important paperwork," he said, trying to make the topic less intimidating. "What paperwork?" Nora asked, ever the inquisitive one. "Papers that say who you are and where you live. Documents." Hazel frowned in confusion. "But we already know who we are." Grant smiled. "Yes, but the rest of the world needs to know too. So you can go to school, see a doctor, travel." The girls exchanged looks, that silent communication they shared. "Is it gonna hurt?" Hazel asked, worried. "No, sweetie, just conversations and forms to fill out." By 10 o'clock, they were in Richard Palmer's office, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind round glasses. His office was elegant yet welcoming, with comfortable chairs where the girls sat, each clutching a small teddy bear. Grant had called earlier, briefly explaining the situation. The lawyer showed no surprise or judgment, only professional pragmatism. "So, Mr. Whitmore," Richard began after introductions, "Dr. Miller gave me some background, but I'd like to hear it all in detail." Grant told the whole story, the alleyway, the girls' precarious state, how he'd taken them in. He only omitted the literal purchase, describing it instead as rescuing neglected children. Richard listened carefully, taking occasional notes. When Grant finished, the lawyer adjusted his glasses and sighed. "We have a complex situation, Mr. Whitmore. What you did was noble but legally questionable. However, there are pathways forward." He turned to the girls, who quietly played with their teddy bears. "Nora, Hazel, do you like living with Mr. Whitmore?" Both nodded vigorously. "Does he take good care of you?" "Yes," Nora answered. "He makes pancakes and takes us to the doctor and never yells. And he has games and books and lets me have a star nightlight," Hazel added. Richard smiled, turning back to Grant. "That helps a lot. Now, the first step is to establish their identities. We need to see if there are any birth certificates. What's their last name?" Grant hesitated. "They mentioned a last name when talking about their father. Sullivan, I think. But I've never seen any documents." Richard wrote it down. "We'll search the records. If we don't find anything, we'll have to create a plausible story. Perhaps that you found them, and that they're the daughters of a distant deceased cousin. That would justify you seeking guardianship without too many questions." Over the next few hours, Richard explained the plan. First, obtain basic documents for the girls, provisional birth certificates based on sworn statements. Then, start the process for temporary guardianship while searching for relatives they all knew would never be found. I won't lie, Mr. Whitmore. There are risks to this approach, but considering the girls' well-being and what you've told me about their background, I believe we have a good chance of success. Grant felt a weight lift from his shoulders. How long will it take? Temporary guardianship could be granted in a few weeks if we work fast. Permanent guardianship will take months, maybe a year. But with the temporary order, you can enroll them in school and put them on your health insurance. In the following weeks, Grant and the girls settled into a routine of visits to the county clerk's office, medical clinics, and Richard's law firm. Each completed form, each official stamp, was a small victory in building their new identities. The pediatrician updated their vaccination cards, recording the doses they needed to catch up on years of neglect. The dental clinic created new patient files in their names. The county clerk's office, with Richard's mediation, issued provisional birth certificates based on testimony. Grant watched in amazement, as each new document seemed to give the girls more substance, not only physically but existentially. The most significant moment came when Richard entered his office a month after the initial meeting, holding an envelope. Judge Hernandez granted the temporary guardianship petition, he announced, handing the document to Grant. Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore. Legally, You are now the guardian of Nora and Hazel Sullivan. Grant opened the envelope with trembling fingers, reading the official decree where the girls' names appeared alongside his. A surge of emotion swept through him. Relief, joy, responsibility. That night at home, he explained to the girls what the document meant. It means now you officially live here. I'm responsible for you by law. No one can take you away. Hazel hugged the paper like it was a treasure, even though she couldn't read the words. Is it like a paper promise? She asked. Grant smiled. Exactly like that. Nora looked at the provisional birth certificate with her name printed, Nora Sullivan, along with an estimated birth date and their current address. Now we really exist, she said, a smile lighting up her face. Before, and it was like being invisible. Grant felt a lump in his throat. For him, these documents were necessary bureaucracy. But for them, they meant so much more. Confirmation they existed, recognition of their place in the world. That night, after the girls were asleep, Grant gazed at the documents scattered on the kitchen table. Certificates, forms, medical records, the tangible pieces of a family that began in the most unlikely way. In a month, Nora and Hazel would start school. In a few weeks, Grant planned to look for a bigger apartment, maybe a small house with a yard. Life was moving forward, building on these fragile pieces of paper that, for two girls who'd never had anything, meant everything. The temporary guardianship paperwork was done, but Grant still had plenty to do. With his financial responsibilities growing, clothes, food, toys, and soon school for the girls, he needed to get back to his normal work pace. As a contract proofreader for a prestigious law firm, he could work from home most of the time, which was perfect for their new family dynamic. That Thursday morning, Grant shut himself in his home office to tackle a particularly complex contract. Before that, he made sure Nora and Hazel were busy in the living room with new coloring books and art supplies he'd bought the day before. I'll be working for a few hours, he explained, pouring hot chocolate for them. If you need anything, you can call me, but try not to interrupt unless it's important. Okay? Yes, Nora replied, already focused on her drawing. Hazel just nodded, absorbed in a book full of animal illustrations. Grant smiled. In just a few weeks, they'd developed enough security to be calm, even when he wasn't in the same room, a big step from the first days, when they followed him around like shadows. In the office, Grant immersed himself in work. The room, kept separate from the rest of the apartment, was his professional sanctuary, a dark wooden desk, shelves organized with law books, and a few personal items he'd kept there for years. Among them was a framed photo of Monroe, smiling at the camera on a sunny day in the park. 3 hours later, Grant was deeply absorbed in contract clauses when he heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. The door opened slowly, and Nora and Hazel peeked in. "Are we bothering you?" Nora asked hesitantly. Grant smiled, pushing away from the computer screen. "No, I could use a break. Come on in." They entered cautiously. It was their first visit to the office, a space they had instinctively respected as Grant's work area. They looked around curiously, taking in every detail, the framed diplomas on the wall, the identical, serious-looking books lining the shelves, the multi-monitor computer setup. "Your job is to read all that?" Hazel asked, pointing to a stack of printed papers. "In part. Yes," Grant explained. "I read contracts to make sure they're correct before people sign them." Nora wandered around the room, examining books on the shelves, while Hazel approached the desk. Her eyes naturally fell on the silver frame. "Who's this pretty lady?" she asked, pointing at the photograph. Grant picked up the frame, feeling the familiar weight in his hands. The photo showed Monroe in Central Park during the last summer they spent together. Her dark hair was slightly windswept. Her eyes, a distinctive green with small brown flecks near the iris, shone with her characteristic vivacity. "She was my wife," he answered, his voice quieter than he intended. "Monroe. Her name was Monroe." Nora, hearing this, came closer and stopped beside her sister to see the photo. "Where is she now?" she asked. Grant took a deep breath before answering. It was a question he'd expected, but there was no easy way to respond. She passed away, he said simply, almost 5 years ago. Like our dad, Hazel observed with childlike bluntness. You must miss her. I do, Grant confirmed. Every day. She was very pretty, Nora commented, studying the photo. She looks happy there. She was, Grant said, a small smile forming at the corner of his lips. It was our anniversary. We had a picnic in the park. At that moment, with both girls leaning over the photo, something strange happened. Grant felt a sort of dislocation, as if time were out of sync. Looking at Nora, at the way her face lit up when she smiled, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. She had Monroe's slightly asymmetrical smile, curving more on the right side. And Hazel, her eyes, as she studied the picture intently, were the exact same shade of green with brown flecks as Monroe's. A coloration so distinct, Grant had always considered it unique. Do you want to know more about her? He asked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Yes, Hazel replied enthusiastically. How did you meet? Grant put the photo back on the desk, trying to ignore the odd sensation growing in his chest. We met in college. I was studying law, she was studying architecture. We literally ran into each other in the library. I knocked over a pile of books she was carrying. And then you fell in love, Nora asked, eyes shining with the simple romance of childhood. Not immediately, Grant smiled. She was pretty annoyed with me at first. But we ran into each other again a few weeks later at a coffee shop, and I made a better impression that time. As he spoke, he couldn't take his mind off the physical similarities he was suddenly noticing. The way Nora tilted her head slightly when interested in something, exactly like Monroe. The shape of Hazel's face, with high cheekbones and a delicate chin. Did you get married in a church? Hazel asked, seating herself in the chair across from the desk. In a garden, Grant answered mechanically, his mind racing. Monroe loved flowers. We had the ceremony in a botanical garden, just a few close friends. The girls kept asking questions about Monroe, what she was like, what she enjoyed, places they had visited together. Grant answered, but part of his mind was fixated on the uncanny physical resemblances that now seemed glaringly obvious. When Nora laughed at something he said about a disastrous honeymoon in Mexico, the sound sent a shiver down Grant's spine. It was the same laugh, that musical laugh so characteristic of Monroe, and when Hazel furrowed her brow trying to remember a question, the same small wrinkles formed between her eyebrows as Monroe's did when she focused intensely on a project. Did you two have kids? Nora asked innocently. The question hit Grant like a punch to the gut. No, he said after a pause. We never got the chance. It wasn't exactly a lie. Monroe had died in childbirth, and their babies, their daughters, also hadn't survived. At least, that was what he had always believed, what his mother had told him, what the doctors had confirmed, what the death certificate stated. But now, looking at the two girls before him, a disquieting doubt began to form in his mind. Their ages matched. The physical similarities were undeniable. Then there was that inexplicable instinct he'd felt in the alley, that compulsion to protect them, to bring them home, as if some part of him recognized them before his conscious mind did. Grant, Hazel called, noticing his prolonged silence. Are you sad? He forced a smile. Just remembering. Sometimes memories can be a bit tough. Our stepmother didn't like it when we talked about our dad, Nora said softly. She said it was a waste of time talking about the dead. It's never a waste of time to remember the people we love, Grant answered, reaching out to gently touch Nora's hair. Dark, slightly wavy hair, just like Monroe's. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, until the girls got distracted by other items in the office. Nora became fascinated by a glass paperweight that refracted light into colorful patterns, while Hazel examined a small shelf of decorative objects. Grant watched them, trying to convince himself he was imagining things, projecting his unresolved grief onto these children fate had placed in his path. It was natural to look for connections, for patterns, especially after a traumatic loss. But as he watched them move around the office, the way Nora carried herself, the way Hazel walked, the small unconscious gestures, his sense of familiarity only grew. morphing into a disturbing certainty. "Who wants a snack?" he asked finally, needing a break from the confusing emotions consuming him. "I do," they answered in unison, running for the door. Following them to the kitchen, Grant shot one last glance at Monroe's photo. He could have sworn her smile looked different now, not just nostalgic, but as if harboring a secret he was beginning to suspect could change everything. 3 days had passed since that conversation in the office, and Grant couldn't get the similarities between the girls and Monroe out of his head. Every gesture, every expression, every laugh seemed like an echo of his late wife, and the feeling only grew stronger as time went on. He tried to push these thoughts away. It was irrational, insane. His daughters had died at birth. His mother had told him. The doctors had confirmed there were death certificates. Nora and Hazel were just 2 vulnerable children whom fate had placed in his path. And yet, on Sunday morning, Grant woke earlier than the girls. He prepared breakfast automatically, his mind still circling around that impossible question. While waiting for the banana pancakes, now an indispensable part of the morning routine, he decided to collect the used towels for laundry. In the bathroom, he picked up the towels scattered on the floor, smiling at the little signs of a child's presence that now filled his once stark apartment: rubber duckies on the edge of the tub, strawberry-flavored toothpaste, colorful slippers. He was about to leave when he noticed the 2 hairbrushes on the sink. One purple for Nora, one pink for Hazel, colors they had chosen at the store days ago. Tangled in the bristles were strands of dark hair. Grant set down the towels and picked up the pink brush. Something almost magnetic drew his eyes to those strands. Dark, slightly wavy hair, just like Monroe's. A shiver ran down his spine as a thought occurred to him. A thought so simple and obvious that he couldn't believe he hadn't considered it before. A DNA test. Scientifically, it could confirm or deny his absurd suspicions. If there was no relation, he could finally silence that insistent voice in his head and move on, loving the girls as adoptive daughters without the ghosts of the past. But if there was, Grant felt his stomach churn. If there was, it would mean a monstrous betrayal, a lie of unimaginable proportions. It would mean someone, and he had a strong suspicion, who had stolen his daughters, faked their deaths, and left them to fend for themselves. He looked again at the brushes. He couldn't keep living with this doubt. He had to know. Carefully, he opened the bathroom drawer and took out 3 small envelopes he usually used for receipts. Gently, he removed several strands from the pink brush and placed them in one envelope. He repeated the process with the purple brush, placing the strands in the second envelope. Finally, he pulled some of his own hairs and slipped them into the third. Sample 1, Sample 2, Sample 3, he labeled the envelopes, avoiding any names. He needed to stay objective, scientific. He couldn't let himself hope or speculate until he had concrete results. He slipped the envelopes into his pants pocket and returned to the kitchen. He arrived just in time to flip the pancakes before they burned. "Grant, are you okay?" Nora's voice surprised him. She stood in the kitchen doorway, still in pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. "I'm fine," he replied, forcing a smile. "I just got up early today, hungry." She nodded, taking a seat at the table. Hazel soon joined them, and breakfast went on as usual, though Grant hardly touched his food, his mind on the plan forming in his head. The next morning, after making sure the girls were occupied with a new puzzle, Grant made a phone call. "Gene Tech Laboratory, good morning," answered a female voice. "Good morning, I'd like information about paternity tests," Grant said, stepping into the hallway to ensure the girls wouldn't overhear. The attendant explained the process, simple, discreet, and relatively quick. He could bring the samples to the downtown lab, fill out a form, and in about 7 business days, he would have the results. Grant scheduled a visit for that same afternoon. He concocted a story about needing to meet an insurance broker and left, the 3 envelopes safely in his jacket's inner pocket. The lab was a modern, discreet building. Inside, a professional receptionist greeted him without asking many questions. Grant filled out the required forms, using only basic information and avoiding full names. "Would you like the results by email, or do you prefer to pick them up in person?" the woman asked. In person, he answered without hesitation. He didn't want such sensitive information floating around electronically. All right, in 7 business days, the results will be ready. Call before you come in, just to confirm. The days that followed were torture. Grant kept up the normal routine with the girls, breakfast with banana pancakes, playtime, bedtime stories at night, but his mind was always elsewhere, counting the hours until the results. Late at night, after they were asleep, he mentally revisited memories of Monroe's pregnancy, the birth, the funeral. He searched for flaws, inconsistencies. He recalled the confusion of those days, how he'd been kept away from the operating room once complications began, how he never saw the bodies, neither Monroe's nor the baby's. His mother insisted on closed caskets, claiming it was better that way, to spare him more pain. Diana Whitmore had always had problems with Monroe. She never fully accepted her daughter-in-law from humble origins, as she'd say in that typical tone of declining aristocracy, but to orchestrate a deception of that magnitude, separating a father from his daughters, it was monstrous, unthinkable. And yet, the pieces were starting to fit. When the 7th day finally arrived, Grant was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He called the lab that morning, and the receptionist confirmed the results were ready. "I need to go downtown for something," he told Nora and Hazel during lunch. "Will you be all right on your own for an hour? I can leave you with cartoons, books, and a snack." The girls, who had gained considerable confidence after almost 2 months with him, assured him they'd be fine. "We can finish our castle puzzle," Hazel suggested. "And I'll make sure she doesn't eat all the cookies," Nora added solemnly, making Grant smile despite his anxiety. At the lab, the same receptionist handed him a sealed envelope. "Everything is in there, Mr. Whitmore. Would you like to open it here or have some privacy?" "I'll take it with me, thanks," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Grant couldn't wait until he got home. He parked near a city park and opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were several pages of complex graphs, tables, and scientific terms. Initially, the data confused him. There was a lot of technical information, genetic markers, compatibility percentages. Then his eyes landed on the conclusions, printed in bold at the end. Probability of paternity between sample 3, alleged father, and sample 1, 99.9997%. Probability of paternity between sample 3, alleged father, and sample 2, 99.9997%. The analyses demonstrate a biological paternal link. The world seemed to freeze around Grant. There it was, in black and white, confirmation of the impossible. Nora and Hazel were his daughters, his and Monroe's, the daughters he believed he'd lost at birth. Something shattered inside him. Tears came, intense and unstoppable. Grant slumped over the steering wheel, his body shaking with sobs that seemed to rise from the depths of his soul. It was an emotional storm, shock from the discovery, relief that his daughters were alive, rage at the monstrous lie, guilt for not suspecting sooner, and above all, an overwhelming love expanding in his chest until he thought it might burst. For nearly 5 years, he had lived under the shadow of their loss, mourning daughters who had actually been growing up somewhere else, likely suffering. And then, by some twist of fate, an alleyway, a heartless woman, an impulsive decision, they had found their way back to him. The cruelty and the miracle of the situation struck simultaneously. Who would do such a thing? Who would steal children from their father and toss them into the world to be mistreated? An image of his mother rose in his mind, prompting another wave of conflicting emotions. When his tears finally subsided, Grant looked at the photo on his car's dashboard. Monroe, smiling in her final summer. What would she think of all this? Did she have any idea what had happened? Could she still be alive somewhere? No, Grant thought. Of that he was certain. Monroe really was gone. Her death was the only part of that tragic story that was true. But their daughters were alive. And by some cruel and wonderful miracle, they had found their way home. With still shaking hands, Grant placed the results back in the envelope and tucked it carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. He wiped his face and took several deep breaths to regain composure. He didn't want the girls, his daughters, to see him so distraught. his eyes red from crying. His daughters. The word now carried new meaning, a different weight. Nora and Hazel weren't just children fate had brought him. They were part of him, part of Monroe, the legacy of the love they had shared. As he drove back home, a new determination grew within him. He needed to uncover the full truth, what had happened during the birth, how his daughters were separated from him, who orchestrated such cruelty, and why. There was only one person who could begin to answer these questions, one person who had been there from the start, who managed everything after Monroe's death, his mother, Diana Whitmore. When he opened the apartment door, he found Nora and Hazel sitting on the living room rug, the castle puzzle nearly complete between them. They looked up, identical smiles spreading across their faces. "You took a while," Nora said. "We missed you," Hazel added, getting up to hug him. Grant crouched, opening his arms to wrap them both in an embrace. This hug was different from all the previous ones. It was the first time he embraced them knowing who they truly were. "I missed you too," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "So much." St. Vincent Memorial Hospital hadn't changed much in 5 years. The same pale blue walls, the same antiseptic smell, the same hushed corridors Grant had walked that fateful day. Now, as he made his way through them, memories assaulted him like tangible ghosts. Here was the waiting room where he'd spent hours pacing, praying for updates. Ahead, the double doors leading to the surgical wing, where Monroe had disappeared on a gurney, her hand slipping from his. And off to the right, the small office where his mother, Diana Whitmore, had delivered the devastating news that had altered the course of his life. News that he now knew was a lie. The DNA test in his pocket burned like a hot coal. For 2 days after receiving the results, Grant had wrestled with himself, trying to find any explanation, any justification, anything that wouldn't confirm the terrible suspicion growing in his mind. But there was no other possibility. His mother, the woman who'd raised him, who always claimed to protect him, had orchestrated the greatest betrayal imaginable. Finding her was easy. Diana Whitmore, now 68, still served on the hospital's board of directors, in the same third-floor office. The hard part was containing the fury threatening to consume him as he rode the elevator. "Mr. Whitmore, your mother is in a meeting but should be done in about 10 minutes, her young secretary said. "Would you like me to let her know you're here?" "No," Grant replied. "I want it to be a surprise." He sat in the waiting area, hands restless on his knees. He had left Nora and Hazel with Mrs. Peterson, a retired neighbor who adored the girls and often offered to help. "Just for a few hours," he'd told her. "I have something important to take care of." Important didn't begin to describe it. This meeting would define not only his relationship with his mother, but the future of his daughters. Daughters who, by some perverse miracle, had found their way back to him. The office door opened, and men in suits exited, followed by Diana Whitmore. Still elegant and imposing, with perfectly arranged grey hair and that same aura of authority she'd always carried. When her eyes landed on Grant in the waiting area, she froze for an instant. It was brief, just a flicker of what might have been fear, before her face assumed its usual composed expression. "Grant, what a wonderful surprise." Her voice was soft, but Grant detected the tension beneath it. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "We need to talk, Mother," he said, standing up. "In private." Diana hesitated only a second before nodding. "Of course, come into my office." She turned to her secretary. "No interruptions, please." The office was exactly as Grant remembered, sparse and impeccably organized, with a view of the nearby park. Diana gestured for him to sit in an armchair, but he remained standing. "What's going on, son?" she asked, studying him with the eyes that always seemed to see beyond appearances. Grant withdrew the envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the desk. "This, Mother, I've discovered your lies." Diana looked at the envelope, her face blanching. "What are you talking about?" "My daughters didn't die at birth," Grant said, his voice trembling slightly but holding steady. "They're alive. And by some cruel twist, they found their way back to me." The silence that followed was thick, almost palpable. Diana didn't move or speak, only stared at the envelope as if it contained a death sentence. She began, but Grant cut her off. "No more lies." He opened the envelope and placed the DNA test results on the desk. Nora and Hazel, the girls I rescued in an alley 3 months ago, are my biological daughters. Mine and Monroe's. Diana closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, a resignation Grant had never seen before showed in them. "How did you find them?" she asked in a whisper. The implicit confirmation in her question hit Grant like a punch. Up to that moment, a small part of him still hoped, prayed for another explanation. "So it's true," he said, almost voiceless. "You really did this. You stole my daughters from me." Diana straightened, reclaiming some of her usual posture. "I did what I thought was best for you, for the family." "Best?" The word burst from Grant like a roar, and he had to fight not to shout. "How could lying about the death of my daughters be best for anyone? You don't understand." Diana walked to the window. "Monroe wasn't suitable. I always knew that from the start. She had no education, no resources, no refinement. When she died in childbirth, I saw a chance to fix everything." "Fix?" Grant felt sick. "My wife died, Mother, the woman I loved, and you saw it as an opportunity. To protect you, yes." Diana turned, her eyes suddenly hard. "You think you'd have been able to raise 2 newborns alone? It would have destroyed your career, your life. And for what? To raise 2 children with her blood." The contempt in her voice at the mention of Monroe made something snap inside Grant. "So you took control of the birth, faked the death certificates, announced my daughters had died, all without telling me. I had connections. I could do it discreetly. I arranged for a couple to adopt them, a good couple in Boston and with resources, education. But they didn't end up in Boston, did they?" Grant advanced, his voice low and dangerous. "Where did they go, Mother? Because I found them being sold in an alley after years of abuse by a stepmother." Diana turned pale. That wasn't supposed to happen. "The couple promised..." "What?" "Promised never to tell me. Promised to keep my daughters away from me forever. It was to protect the Whitmore legacy, Grant." Diana tried to regain some dignity. "You don't understand what it means to carry the Whitmore name. Generations of respectability, connections. Monroe was already a mistake, but the children, I couldn't allow it." Grant felt the air leave the room. The full extent of his mother's betrayal finally lay bare. It wasn't just about him or even Monroe. It was about prejudice, arrogance, control. "You stole my family," he said, each word laced with a simmering fury. "You had no right." "I'm your mother." Diana raised her chin, defiant even in the face of her treachery. "I did what I thought was best for you." "No." Grant shook his head. "You did what was best for you, for your image, your precious family legacy." He snatched up the test result and the envelope, tucking them back in his pocket. "You know what's ironic, Mother? Your lies almost worked. You almost kept us apart forever. But then, by some miracle I don't deserve, had my daughters found their way back to me." Diana took a step toward him, extending a hand. "Grant, we can fix this. I can help with the girls, ensure they have everything they need. We can be a family again." Grant's bitter laugh made her recoil. "A family? You destroyed any chance of that the moment you decided your granddaughters weren't worthy of the Whitmore name." He turned to the door, but paused before leaving. "I won't turn you in to the authorities, not for your sake, but because I don't want my daughters exposed to more trauma. They've already been through enough because of you." "What are you going to do?" Diana asked, her voice suddenly frail, as if she finally grasped the magnitude of what she'd done. Grant looked at her one last time. "I'm going to do what you prevented me from doing 5 years ago. I'm going to raise my daughters, love them, protect them. And I'll make sure they know who their mother was, a beautiful, brave, loving woman." "What about me?" Diana's voice was barely a whisper. "To them, you don't exist." Grant opened the door. "To me, you don't exist either." As he walked down the hospital corridor, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, not completely, since the pain of betrayal was still fresh, but enough that he could breathe again. The truth, however painful, was liberating. Outside, the afternoon sun lit up the city. Grant inhaled deeply, letting the clean air fill his lungs. He thought of Nora and Hazel waiting for him, his daughters, his future. It was time to go home. After confronting his mother, Grant felt a renewed urgency to ensure Nora and Hazel had everything they deserved. The first thing to address was space. The makeshift bedroom in his old office was fine temporarily, but his daughters deserved more. Though the apartment was large enough for a single man, it wasn't ideal for a family. So Grant began searching for a new home, somewhere they could truly call theirs. He found a 2-story house with a small backyard in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. It had 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a cozy kitchen. The price was higher than he'd initially planned, but Grant didn't hesitate. He wanted to give the girls the best he could. When he showed photos of the house to Nora and Hazel, they were enchanted. "Is this a real house?" Hazel asked, her eyes wide at the photo of a leafy yard. "It's our real house," Grant confirmed. "If you like it, of course. Is there space to play outside?" Nora seemed in disbelief. "There is, and each of you can have your own room." The girls exchanged surprised looks. "Separate rooms?" Hazel asked, suddenly worried. Grant smiled. "Or you can share a bigger room if you prefer. The third one could be a play or study room." The relief on their faces was immediate. Even after 3 months living with Grant, they still felt safer together, especially at night. "We want to stay together," Nora said, holding her sister's hand, "but a playroom would be cool." The move was completed in 2 weeks. Grant hired professionals to paint and prepare the house before they moved in. The girls' bedroom, the largest after the master, was painted a soft mint green, cheerful but neutral, with a pale blue ceiling reminiscent of the sky. On moving day, Grant had a surprise. After showing the rest of the house, he stopped outside the closed door to their room. "This is your room, but it's still empty," he said, hand on the knob. "I thought we could decorate it together. Exactly how you want." Nora and Hazel's eyes shone with a thrill that was still new to them, the possibility of choice, personal expression. When Grant opened the door to reveal the spacious room with freshly painted walls and polished wooden floors, they walked in reverently, as if entering a sacred space. "It's so big," Hazel whispered. "And so pretty," Nora added, spinning slowly to take it all in. Grant watched them from the doorway, his heart full. These were his daughters, his and Monroe's, and at last he could give them everything they should have had from the start. "How about we go shopping today?" he suggested. "We can pick out beds, dressers, shelves, and anything you want." That day, Grant witnessed a transformation in the girls. In the children's furniture store, their initial shyness dissolved into growing excitement as they realized they could really choose. Nora would point to one bed, then change her mind when she saw another. Hazel, usually quieter, held firm opinions about what she liked or disliked. "What do you think of these?" Grant asked, showing them 2 white wooden beds with rounded, classic-style headboards. The girls exchanged looks and nodded enthusiastically. "They're like princess beds," Hazel said, running her hand along the smooth wood. In the bedding section, he let them choose freely again. Nora went for a set with stars and planets in shades of blue and purple, while Hazel chose colorful flowers on a pale pink background, so different, yet complementing each other, just like their personalities. In the days that followed, the shopping continued. Grant took them to various stores, letting them explore every possibility. Together, they selected a fluffy, floral-patterned rug to cover most of the floor, 2 white dressers for their clothes, shelves for books and toys, and a desk where they could draw and eventually do homework. In a toy store, Grant watched how their eyes lit up at so many possibilities. Unlike the first time he'd taken them to buy toys, when they were still hesitant, they now explored with confidence, knowing they could voice their desires. Nora chose a brown-haired doll she could style, along with a set of miniature animals for her growing collection. Hazel was instantly drawn to a large, soft teddy bear in caramel color, with a blue ribbon around its neck. She hugged it immediately, burying her face in the synthetic fur, and Grant knew it was love at first sight. "Do you want this one?" he asked, smiling at his daughter. Hazel nodded, still hugging the bear. "Can I call him Caramel?" "That's a great name," Grant replied. In the lighting section of another store, They found small star-shaped string lights to hang on the windows, creating a magical effect at night. The girls were delighted, and Grant bought several boxes. Within a week, the bedroom began to take shape. Grant assembled the furniture while the girls helped however they could, holding screws or pretending to read instructions they couldn't fully understand yet, which Grant found adorable. Together, they arranged the clothes in dressers, organized the toys on shelves, and hung the string lights around the windows and beds. When everything was finally done, Grant stopped in the doorway, admiring the result. It was perfect, not in the sense of a professionally designed space, but perfect because it reflected exactly who Nora and Hazel were. Every item had been chosen with care. Every detail felt important. It was a space that shouted home in a way no other room ever had. The girls ran into the room, spinning with arms wide open, marveling at their shared creation. "Look how pretty it is," Nora exclaimed, jumping onto her bed. Hazel, hugging Caramel the bear, twirled in the center of the room, her dress flaring around her. "Now this room is really ours," she said, her smile lighting up her entire face. Grant leaned against the doorframe, feeling a rush of emotions, both sweet and bittersweet. These were the beds they should have assembled 5 years ago. This was the room he and Monroe had planned to decorate together. But even without her presence, he had managed to create something special for their daughters. "Do you really like it?" he asked, though the answer was clear from their glowing faces. "It's the best room in the world," Nora declared, hopping off the bed to hug him. "Thank you, Grant," Hazel said, joining the hug. Grant knelt, holding them tightly, feeling both their fragility and the strength they shared in those small bodies. "So you're welcome, my little ones," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. With the house settled and the bedroom ready, it was time for another important step: school. With their paperwork now in order, definitive guardianship still pending, but the temporary order was enough. Grant found a well-regarded elementary school just a few blocks from their new home. The principal, Mrs. Reynolds, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind brightly colored frames, met with Grant and the girls for an initial evaluation. "They've never attended school before?" she asked, surprised but not judgmental. "They had a complicated family situation before they came to live with me," Grant said carefully, mindful of the girls' presence. "They had no formal education." Mrs. Reynolds nodded understandingly. After chatting with the girls and giving them simple tests, she determined that despite their delay, both were bright and curious. "We'll place them in our Level Up class initially," she explained. "It's a smaller group with teachers specialized in helping children catch up to their age level. With their progress, they might join the regular class next semester." On the first day of school, Grant felt a kind of anxiety he'd never known. He dressed the girls carefully: new uniforms, colorful backpacks, lunch boxes with sandwiches, and fruit he prepared meticulously. He braided Hazel's hair into 2 pigtails as she'd requested, and helped Nora tie the laces on her new sneakers. "Are you nervous?" he asked, adjusting the strap on Nora's backpack. "A little," she admitted. Hazel only nodded, clutching Caramel to her chest. Grant had allowed her to bring the bear on this first day for comfort. "It'll be fun," he assured them, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "You'll meet other kids, learn new things. I'll be right here at the door when you come out." He accompanied them to the classroom, where their teacher, Miss Lauren, a young woman with a warm smile, greeted them enthusiastically. Grant watched, heart tight, as they sat in small, colorful chairs, looking both lost and fascinated by the new environment. "They'll be fine," the teacher assured him, noting his reluctance to leave, and they were. In the following weeks, Nora and Hazel thrived at school. They began recognizing letters, counting to 20, singing children's songs they repeated endlessly at home. They made friends, shyly at first, then with growing confidence. Grant received regular updates from Miss Lauren, all highlighting their remarkable progress. "They have an admirable thirst for learning, the teacher said during a meeting. "They soak everything up like sponges." Grant's favorite moment, however, was dismissal time. He'd wait at the school gate with the other parents, watching the main door anxiously. Then, like magic, they'd appear, Nora usually in front, then Hazel holding her sister's hand. Their eyes would scan the group of adults until they found Grant. What happened next never failed to move him. Their faces lit up with brilliant smiles, and they ran toward him, backpacks bouncing, small feet slapping the pavement until they threw themselves into his open arms. No words were needed, just a tight hug, the warmth of their small bodies against his, the smell of pencils and glue, and the innocence they somehow still possessed. It was a gesture that said more than any thank you could, a gesture of gratitude, trust, and love in its purest form. On the way home, they chatted non-stop about their day, what they learned, new friends, the small dramas of the playground. Grant listened to every word, taking in their excitement and concerns as if they were the most important things in the world, because to him they were. At night, after dinner and bath time, their established routine continued with bedtime stories in the room they had decorated together. The starry lights glowed softly, creating a magical ambiance as Grant read fairy tales, adventures, and mysteries. Nora usually fell asleep first, curled under her star-patterned comforter. Hazel held out a bit longer, hugging Caramel, as if savoring every moment she could in that safe space. "Grant," she called one night, just as he was getting up to leave. "Yes, sweetie." "I really like our room." He smiled, tucking the blanket around her. "I do too, you girls made great choices." "And I like our house." "And school," she hesitated, her eyes shining in the dim light. "And you." Grant felt his heart swell in his chest. "I like you too, Hazel, more than I can ever explain." She smiled sleepily, her eyes drifting closed. "Good night. Good night, little one," he whispered, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Leaving the door slightly ajar, as they preferred, Grant paused in the hallway to glance back at his daughters, sound asleep. The room they had created was more than a physical space. It was a symbol of the home they were building together, the family they were becoming, and the future they would share. A future that, despite all the obstacles and betrayals of the past, now shone with infinite possibilities. Autumn had arrived with its golden colors and cooler air. The trees in Grant's small backyard were turning shades of red and orange, creating a natural tapestry that delighted Nora and Hazel. That Sunday afternoon, they played among the fallen leaves, building small piles they'd jump into, giggling at every burst of color. Grant watched them from the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, his face showing the contented smile that had become frequent in recent months. School was going well. The house finally felt like a home, and the adoption papers were nearly complete. Though legally, they didn't need confirmation of what everyone already knew. They were a family. The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. He wasn't expecting anyone. Maybe it was Elaine, the next-door neighbor, who often dropped by with leftover pie or homemade cookies. But when he opened the door, he saw someone he never expected to see. Diana Whitmore stood there at the entrance of his home, his mother, whom he had neither seen nor spoken to since that confrontation at the hospital 3 months ago. His first instinct was to close the door immediately, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the state she was in, so different from the imposing woman he'd always known. She seemed smaller somehow, older. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, showed stray gray strands. Dark circles lay under her eyes, and her hands, typically steady, trembled slightly around a worn handbag. "What are you doing here?" Grant asked, keeping his voice low so the girls in the yard wouldn't hear. Diana swallowed hard, her eyes avoiding direct contact. "I had to see you. To talk to you." Grant hesitated, torn between the anger he still felt and the fragile image of his mother before him. Finally, he stepped aside, allowing her in. "The girls are in the backyard. I don't want them seeing us argue." Diana nodded, entering silently. In the hallway, she paused before a framed photo on the wall, Grant with Nora and Hazel at a park, all three smiling for the camera. Her eyes rested on the picture for a long moment. "They look happy," she commented softly. "They are," Grant replied, leading her into the living room, away from the windows overlooking the yard. "What do you want, Mother?" Diana sat on the edge of the couch, appearing displaced and uneasy, a stark contrast to someone who once acted as if the whole world was her domain. She placed the bag in her lap like a shield, finally lifting her gaze to meet his. "I came to ask for your forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I know I don't deserve it, but I can't keep living with this burden without at least trying." Grant sat in the armchair across from her, studying her carefully, searching for signs of the manipulation he knew too well. But all he saw was a woman aged by remorse. "I was unfair and prejudiced," Diana continued, her words seeming difficult to say. "I thought your wife, coming from a humble background, would tarnish our family. I only cared about the Whitmore name, about reputation and appearances, things that felt so important then but are now obviously hollow." A tear escaped, sliding down her lined face. Grant couldn't recall ever seeing his mother cry before. "I lost you, my only son, and only now do I truly understand what that means. I miss you, and after our estrangement I live with guilt every day." Diana took a shaky breath, her voice nearly a whisper. "Forgive me." Grant felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger for what she had done, for nearly costing him everything, but also a strange compassion for the broken woman before him, and an understanding that clinging to hatred would only bring more suffering to both of them. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, Nora and Hazel now took turns on a swing he'd hung from a sturdy tree. Their laughter reached his ears even through the glass, pure and innocent. Those children, his daughters, had been through so much: abandonment, abuse, uncertainty. Yet here they were, able to laugh, to trust, to love. If they could overcome so much, shouldn't he at least consider the possibility of forgiveness? Not for Diana, not entirely, not yet, but for Nora and Hazel, for Monroe, who always believed in the best of people. And maybe most importantly for himself. "Why now?" he asked, still turned away. "Why come asking for forgiveness after all these months?" Diana paused. "Because I finally understand what I lost. Not just my son, but the chance to know my granddaughters. The chance to be part of something bigger than my own pride." She paused again. "And because I spent so many years trapped in conventions and appearances that I forgot what truly matters. Life's too short for that, Grant. I realized it too late." Grant turned around, studying the face he knew so well, yet had never seen so vulnerable. "How can I trust you again?" "You can't," Diana said simply. "Not yet. I can only ask for a chance to show you I've changed, that I've learned." Grant's eyes returned to the backyard, where his daughters were now collecting particularly pretty leaves and placing them in small plastic bags, a school project for making autumn collages. His chest tightened as he realized they deserved all the family they could have. "For them," he said at last, turning back to Diana, "I'll let you try to earn our love again, but no more lies." Diana stood, her hands still shaking. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." "It won't be easy," Grant warned, "and it'll be on my terms, not yours. The girls come first, always." "I understand," Diana nodded. "May I meet them today?" Grant shook his head. "Not yet. I need to prepare them first, and I need to be sure you've really changed." Diana accepted his answer with a resigned dignity Grant had never seen in her. As she prepared to leave, she paused again in front of the photograph in the hallway. "They have her eyes," she said softly, referencing Monroe. "I should have seen it before." "Yes," Grant agreed. "They have a lot of her, in all the best ways." As he watched his mother walk down to her car parked on the street, Grant felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, not yet. But maybe it was the first step towards something new, something that, like the falling leaves outside, allowed the old and withered to give way to something fresh and renewed. He went back to the yard, where his daughters greeted him with smiles and hands full of autumn treasures. In that moment, he knew he'd made the right decision, for them, for all of them. Grant's house gleamed with color and life that special afternoon. Bright balloons floated near the ceiling. Streamers gently danced in the breeze from open windows, and a handmade banner, letters painted in slightly uneven strokes, proclaimed, "Happy Birthday, Nora and Hazel," above the fireplace. In the center of the coffee table sat a vanilla cake with 6 candles, patiently waiting for the birthday girls. Grant placed the last decoration, double-checking that everything was perfect for the occasion. This would be his daughter's first real birthday, their first celebration as a true family, surrounded by love and care. The thought filled him with warmth, and also a twinge of sadness for the 5 birthdays he had missed, years that could never be regained. In the kitchen, Diana was arranging decorated cups on a silver tray that had been in the family for generations. Over the 2 months since her reconciliation with Grant, she had shown genuine, profound change. Beginning with brief, carefully supervised visits, she gradually became a constant, loving presence, always respecting the boundaries Grant set, never rushing the process of healing. "The tea is ready," she announced, stepping into the living room with the tray. Her eyes, softer than they'd ever been, roamed over the festive decor. "Everything looks absolutely lovely, Grant." "I hope they like it," he replied, adjusting a stack of brightly wrapped presents with elaborate ribbons. Among the packages was one special gift, still hidden, a newly arrived court document, elegantly framed, formalizing the girl's adoption. Although they were his biological daughters, Grant had pursued the legal process to secure his parental rights beyond question. The sound of light footsteps on the stairs drew both of their gazes upward, anticipation in their eyes. Elaine, the neighbor who had become the family's close friend, had helped dress the girls for the surprise, keeping them entertained upstairs while final preparations were made. "Here they come," Diana whispered, nervously adjusting her pearl necklace and smoothing an imaginary wrinkle in her pale blue dress. When Nora and Hazel finally entered the room, a joyful chorus of surprise greeted them. Grant, Diana, Elaine, and a few school friends with their parents, all invited to the small but meaningful celebration. The girls froze in the doorway, utterly amazed. They wore brand new dresses chosen especially for the occasion, Nora in a sky blue dress embroidered with tiny silver stars on the skirt, Hazel in a soft pink dress with delicate flowers that seemed to dance with every move. Their hair, now shiny and healthy, so different from their first days, was adorned with ribbons matching their dresses. "All this is for us?" Hazel asked, her eyes traveling around the colorful room, barely believing what she saw. "All for you," Grant confirmed, kneeling down to welcome them in a warm hug. The afternoon passed in a swirl of games and laughter that filled the house with a sparkling sound. Grant watched, fascinated and grateful, at the complete transformation of his daughters from the day he'd found them in that dark alley. Now they were typical children, joyful, confident, and visibly thriving under the warmth of a loving home. Diana, for her part, devoted herself wholeheartedly to the granddaughters she'd nearly lost forever to her own pride and prejudice. In the beginning, the girls had been naturally reserved with her, but her constant patience and genuine remorse gradually won them over. Today they called her Grandma Di, a simple nickname that always brought genuine emotion to her eyes, once so cold, now filled with renewed warmth. When it was finally time for cake, everyone gathered around the table. 6 candles glowed like little stars on the smooth vanilla frosting. Grant took the knife to cut the cake, while Diana, with a grace she'd always possessed but rarely displayed, poured tea for the adults and fruit punch for the kids into bright-colored cups. "Before we sing Happy Birthday," Grant said, his voice slightly thick with emotion, "I want to say a few words to our birthday girls." The room fell completely silent, every gaze fixed on him. Grant looked at his daughters, feeling a lump form in his throat that nearly kept him from speaking. "Nora, Hazel, a year ago, I didn't even know you existed. And now, I can't imagine a single day of my life without you." He paused, searching for the right words to express the inexpressible. "Your mother, Monroe, would be so proud of the wonderful, strong girls you've become. And I am Keats, without a doubt, the luckiest man in the world to be your dad." Tears shone in Nora's eyes, while Hazel gripped Grant's hand as if never wanting to let go. "And I," added Diana, her voice calm yet filled with emotion, "I'm absolutely blessed to have the chance to know and love my granddaughters. For so long I lost sight of what really matters in life. But you taught me the most valuable lesson of all. It's never too late for love to return." Everyone joined in an enthusiastic, if slightly off-key, version of Happy Birthday. The girls blew out their candles together, as they did everything in life, and the room erupted into warm applause. Grant sliced the vanilla cake, chosen because both girls had solemnly declared it the best flavor in the entire world, and Diana served generous slices on plates decorated with festive designs. The moment was so natural, so genuinely familial, it almost seemed impossible to recall the extraordinary, unlikely journey that had brought them here. After the guests left and the gifts had been opened amidst exclamations of joy, when the house finally quieted under the gentle glow of dusk, Grant gathered Diana and the girls in the living room, illuminated by the sun's golden farewell. "I have one more present for you," he said, lifting the framed document he'd kept hidden. "This paper says that officially, in everyone's eyes, we're a family forever." The girls studied the document curiously, not fully grasping its legal weight, but perfectly understanding the words that mattered. Family and forever. "Really forever?" Hazel asked, her eyes wide with almost tangible hope. "Really forever," Grant confirmed, his voice steady and confident. "Nothing can change that." Without hesitation, Nora and Hazel threw themselves into his arms in one of those complete, wholehearted hugs only children can give. Grant wrapped them up, feeling their little hearts beating against his in perfect harmony. After a moment of silent connection, Hazel extended a small hand toward Diana. "Is Grandma Di also family forever?" Diana hesitated briefly, looking at Grant, asking a silent question with her eyes. He nodded in response, a slight smile of acceptance on his lips. "Yes," she answered, joining the group hug with an almost reverent gratitude. "If you'll have me, I'm family forever, too." In the embrace that followed, all the elements of their extraordinary journey were present: the searing pain of the past, the overwhelming joy of the present, and the bright hope of the future. A family forged by the deepest sorrow, shaped by the hardest forgiveness, and finally sealed by the love that, against all odds, found its way back home to stay. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.